Welcome to Vikings Happy Hour, where we mix our favorite beverage and talk of your Minnesota Vikings.
Hello, welcome back to another episode of Vikings Happy Hour. I am your host, Matt Ant. Tonight I am joined by Chris Blystone and Ryan Ortega. How are you guys doing tonight? Chris, we can start with you. Thank you for coming on.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here and glad to talk football. It's nice to be close enough we can actually talk about football.
I know, right? The time is now. Even though it's just preseason, it still gets me going here. So,
Absolutely.
Ryan, how about yourself, buddy?
Doing well. Just rushing from call to call here. Planning a trip for a bunch of my buddies who are coming up from North Carolina for the Seattle game, the home opener. So we were on that right until this started, essentially. So again, sorry for the tardiness, and glad everyone is here to listen to us talk football, and excited to hear Chris's perspective. Chris, you're from is it Blue Stampede? Is that correct?
Stampede Blue. Yep.
Stampede Blue.
Stampede Blue.
Awesome.
Well, I'm hoping I'm sitting in a hotel room tonight. I'm hoping that the internet can carry us through. If not, Dave and Ryan have the show in good hands. But I'm going to toss it to Ryan right away. Chris, I don't know if you were able to watch any of the Vikings game leading up to this week's game. But Ryan, why don't you fill Chris in on kind of how last game went for us, minus 31 starters.
Sure. Yeah, I hope Chris is a little bit more optimistic about his team than we are right now, at least based on the first game. Now, again, huge caveat. Of course, we were missing all of our starters, a bunch of our quality backups in that game. So really it was an opportunity for the young guys and folks who are fighting for the final roster spots and even starter spots, because there was a couple of guys in there that were to kind of showcase what they had. I don't think it was a great showing. I think our offensive line did show that our depth is better maybe than it has been in the past. I think our offensive line did actually relatively well in that game against the Denver starters and their backups. Considering, again, Samia had an awful year last year. Dozier was still really bad, so I'm surprised he's still on the team. So we had a couple guys who showcased that they can, maybe be a little better. It's a couple guys who maybe regressed a little bit. I know Cam Dancer, one of our promising young corners, did not have the greatest showing. Our safeties did not look great. Linebackers looked subpar. So, Chris, I think the Indianapolis Colts are in for a good opportunity, at least your backups versus our backups, to kind of show what they have, or we really need to step up, because what we showed in that first preseason game was not up to par, and Zimmer let them know it. So excited to hear a little bit more about the Colts and how your guys' first preseason started out.
Yeah, why don't you start
absolutely.
us with your quarterback here? So minus Wentz, and you're running out two kind of unknown guys. How'd they do last week?
So that's the most interesting story really about the Colts, at least for this preseason, is the two quarterbacks. So it's a very interesting situation, kind of unlike what the Colts management has done in the past, because post Peyton Manning, kind of the mandate from owner Jim Irsay was, we're not going to have some backup who's just a nobody, because we know what happens when we do that. And so they've had a pretty good backup on the roster since then. They had Matt Hasselbeck for a while, Jacoby Brissett. They've had guys who can play. They're not the guy you want to see playing, but they can get you through a couple of games. So when they brought Carson Wentz in, they didn't really bring anybody on with a lot of experience. Brett Hundley is our most experienced quarterback. You guys will be somewhat familiar with his work. It's not exactly glowing, and so that's the guy who has the experience. Before this first preseason game, there was not an NFL snap to be had between either of our, presumably quarterback 3 and 2. Jacob Eason, basically didn't. He was more on the practice squad. He was more on the sidelines, inactive most of the season last year. Big arm, a lot of talent, but raw player, not real mobile. kind of more your statue in the pocket, traditional old school pocket passing guy. He's got a great arm. He can make some crazy throws. He's kind of a little slow to process. And so the question is, can he turn the corner and get to where he works through those progressions better? Can he get better pocket presence? In the first game, he didn't have that. His pocket presence was pretty poor, and that was not helped by the fact that we basically had a left tackle who was a cardboard cutout. I basically, the defensive ends were living in our backfield, and he was backing up a little bit. The offensive coordinator talked about this week that he was dropping a little too far back in the pocket and making life harder for those tackles anyway. But then you have the guy on the other side. You've got Sam Ehlinger, who is, the Texas quarterback, who he's crazy mobile. He is great working through his progressions. He's the guy who knows exactly what to do with the ball. He's a mobile threat and can evade pressure in the pocket. But he's got a noodle arm, and he can't throw the out routes. He can't get the ball where it needs to be. He looks like he's shot putting it when he has to get it farther than 15 yards down the field. And against starting caliber corners, you have a hard time seeing how this guy can stack up. So if you could smash those two together, we'd be really happy with the product we had. And the question will be whether Eason can develop the areas that he needs to develop. I feel like there are some limitations with Ehlinger where you're going to be just working around him, but it'll be interesting to see both of them and how they fare. I don't know in terms of starters what the intent is for the Vikings to start guys. The Colts have said they're going to start most, but not all of their starters for at least maybe a series. I don't know how long they will play. I would guess not very long, but getting to see them play, Ehlinger is likely to get the start according to Reich, and getting to see him play against some actual starting corners would be great, because then it would tell us a lot about what we've actually got there.
Is there still doubt that Wentz will be ready for week one, or how is that kind of working over there right now?
Yeah, there is no certainty at this point. They're optimistic, but basically Reich has said he's doing walkthroughs. He started yesterday doing walkthroughs at practice. And from there, they will ramp up his more, I'm trying to think of the way that they described it. Aggressive wasn't the word, but more strenuous rehab. And that will really tell them a whole lot. Depending on how he responds to that, will tell them a whole lot about timeline. Reich doesn't like to practice less than 2 weeks with a quarterback before starting him. So he really wants him to be back within a couple weeks healthy in order to start him in the opener. I don't know if they would start him. They've already said, the owner said across the board, they've said they're not starting him until he's 100%. But the way Reich has described it, his particular injury is less about damaging the recovery process and more about pain management. Once he gets to a certain point where it would be feasible to start him, they could do it, and it's not necessarily about causing more damage. Just can he handle it? Is it functional for him to work? So I don't know. I mean, he hasn't had most of camp to play with the Colts. He had a terrible season last season, and you really wanted the preseason for him to build some confidence and get a connection with these receivers. Quentin Nelson is not necessarily going to be in there, so you don't know how good his protection is. This is a guy with a history of kind of essentially almost like PTSD because of the line that he played behind last year, where he's hearing those footsteps and just making terrible decisions. So the last thing you want to do is rush him back. So I think the Colts will slow play it. They have a pretty good team across the rest of the roster, and so they may be willing to say, we'll roll with Jacob Eason or Sam Ehlinger for a week and make sure that he's right.
Sure. What was the reaction with the Colts fan base around bringing in Carson Wentz? Because I think there's probably a little bit of a intrigue there for some Viking fans, only just because a lot of Viking fans do come from North Dakota, and he's loved up there, right? So, for example, my seat neighbor I have season tickets to the Vikings, and my seat neighbor gave me their Colts tickets because Wentz wasn't playing anymore. They were going to come out from Montana just to watch him play a series, right? And when he went down, they gave me the tickets. So what was a fan's reaction from a Colts perspective of bringing him in for the price that you did?
It was very mixed, and it has gotten worse and worse the more there has been buzz about Justin Fields. The Colts were in a range where they could potentially have moved up and made that move. The argument I've made, and the argument I think many more rational people have made, is there was no way for anyone to know that Justin Fields was going to fall. There was no way to know there was going to be any viable option. Chris Ballard couldn't just let this roster, which is honestly, with Andrew Luck on this roster, this is a Super Bowl caliber roster. With a top tier quarterback, it's that good. So you can't just not do anything at quarterback and just punt on the year and say, well, we're probably going to have 8 or 9 wins. if we do okay, and 6 wins if we do badly, but we're not going to be in range to get better at quarter. They had to do something. They had to make a move. I think I have mixed feelings. I think there is definitely some upside there. I think that there's film evidence that Carson Wentz has a lot of talent, and that if he's surrounded by a really good team, he could do some pretty impressive things. But I always go back to his best season. He played on a team that won the Super Bowl without him. And that is hard for me to stomach, because that tells you about the need for that surrounding talent. So he's not going to necessarily carry a team. I think he is, I would say, maybe in my mind, and this may be an unfair assessment and, demeaning of him, but I would say he's a rich man's Andy Dalton. The guy who is going to rise with the ship, and he can do some incredible things. He's going to have his moments, but man, he's going to have some mind-bogglingly stupid things too. So I don't know what to think. I know a lot of fans were all the way in, and Colts fans aren't, considering the amount of good things that have happened to Colts fans, we're remarkably pessimistic about things. We're huge babies about quarterbacks. We have not experienced a loss of really talent. I mean, we had 20 solid years of quarterback play to enjoy, and man, can that spoil a group of people really badly. We don't really know how to deal with poor quarterback play. And so I think it's been a very mixed bag. I am cautiously optimistic based on what I've heard from camp, but he was pretty limited there, even in how long he was able to practice. So
Sure.
Well, let's switch lanes here, and enough of the quarterback talk. We have our own quarterback stuff going on here with Kirk Cousins, Kellen Mond, and the quickly rising star Jake Browning, but then he quickly faltered after one preseason game. So let's look ahead to our matchup this weekend. Colts, Vikings, this Saturday. I think the game's at 8 o'clock Central, or Eastern, sorry. And I want to know, Chris, are there any matchups that you are specifically looking for this weekend? I know you're probably not going to get a whole lot of starter play like you alluded to earlier, but maybe there's some fringe players that are competing for starting jobs that we don't know about. And then Ryan, I'll let you take the flip side of that coin.
Yeah, absolutely. So first name is one that Colts fans have been buzzing about, and it's definitely the coolest story. And if it could turn into something real, that'd be awesome. But that's wide receiver, and it's rookie wide receiver Mike Strawn. He was a 7th round pick. He has no business doing anything with this roster. This is not a great receiver roster, but we have 4 very good receivers in place. T.Y. Hilton, Michael Pittman, Paris Campbell, and Zach Pascal. That's pretty set. There wasn't really anything barring just a crazy breakout that was going to shake up those top 4. And none of those guys is necessarily a dominant player, but the drop off from top to bottom is pretty narrow. So they're a pretty talented receiver core, if not spectacular. And Mike Strawn has just come in and been this force. He's 224, 6'5", big guy. And he is high pointing the ball, boxing out guys. He was, pulling down balls in coverage one-on-one against Xavier Rhodes, who has looked really good. Obviously, we'll probably talk a little more about him a little bit later on, but he's gone up against the top corners for the Colts and looked okay. And then the Colts we've had this happen. We fall in love with these late round receivers. This is what all of us do in preseason. And especially Colts fans, we've had a run of these like 6th, 7th round guys who look good in camp. And then as soon as you get them in a preseason game, they disappear. And he didn't. I mean, he was the top receiver in the first game. He looked good. He had, I believe, a 37-yard, pass that he pulled down. He had a couple of really nice shorter. He was just kind of great. He high pointed a really nice ball against a talented corner in that game, and has just looked the part of a guy you're going to see big things out of. We're looking to see that continue. He's going to be he was running with the ones a little bit this week, and I imagine they'll give him some significant playing time to prove himself against maybe some better quality defenders. And he's definitely a guy to watch because he's an exciting player. It's cool to consider a guy succeeding who's a 7th round pick. That just doesn't happen often.
Yeah, well, he'll get plenty of opportunity going up. I imagine it'll be not our starter, so I doubt he goes up against Breland or Peterson, but potentially Dantzler, which Dantzler showed some flashes last year. So that might be a matchup here to watch this weekend. Ryan, who are you watching this weekend?
Yeah, I want to see, not necessarily one specific person, but again, I want to watch this offensive line play against, hopefully, see their starting defensive line. I'd love to see how like Oli Udo and Ezra Cleveland and Garrett Bradbury, the interior of that line, holds up against the Colts defense tackles, specifically if he plays DeForest Buckner. DeForest Buckner turned Drew Samia into a meme last year by absolutely obliterating him in the game that we played against them. And I want to see how Oli Udo does stack up against that analysis, right? Because I think, when you go against a guy like Buckner, who is just a beast, you can really gauge how well or how far your offensive line has come in that 1 year period. We were quite atrocious last year. I think everybody knows that. And for us to be able to show at least a little bit of life, a little bit of oomph, so to speak, and maybe have a couple really solid reps against Buckner. And Chris, you can maybe talk to me about any other strong defensive linemen, more so interior D linemen that you guys have. But Buckner is just the name that really comes to life for me because of that Samia play. So I want to watch that. And again, and to Chris's point as well, their receiver group versus our corners. Chris Boyd had a heck of a game last week, going up 1-on-1 against Jerry Jeudy, who by all counts is just torching all of the Broncos secondary all camp. And I think Chris Boyd held his own. And obviously, Dantzler struggled a little bit, more so in the run support than he did in the pass protection, but he didn't do great in that either. But the Colts have a talented group of receivers, like Chris said. And I'm also really excited to watch Paris Campbell because I got him on a couple fantasy teams. So I want to see if he's the real deal, if he can stay healthy and be a quality player. So I think those are a couple things that I'm watching out for. And then, of course, Chris talked about quarterback play. I want to watch our backup quarterback competition. I want to see Kellen Mond take that next step this game, have a little bit wider of a playbook instead of the super limited playbook he had last week, and see if he can continue to progress the way he's progressing in practice to take over that second spot, because Browning was super uninspiring last week. And if Kirk goes out with COVID or something like that, we cannot afford to trot out Jake Browning. That'd be worse than trotting out Sam Ehlinger, because at least Ehlinger can run. So that's just not something I want to see. So those are the, I guess, three core things I'm looking for this weekend when I go to the game.
Yeah. Well, I do have a couple more that I have to throw out there. So one of the things you mentioned, interior defensive guys, I am looking forward to seeing, and I doubt they'll play much. Another guy to watch on the interior is Grover Stewart. He's an underrated guy that plays the nose tackle position and doesn't get a whole lot of credit. It's a thankless job, but when you're next to DeForest Buckner, with those two together, they are a formidable group. And if you can hold up against those guys, you're going to do pretty well on the interior against just about anybody. But on the defensive line, those guys aren't the ones that concern me, because when they're on, I think DeForest Buckner mitigates a ton of problems on the defensive line by himself, because he's just a force, and having to deal with him takes a lot of attention. The guys I'm really excited about, Kwity Paye, the rookie first round defensive end that the Colts took this year. I'm excited to see him. He was out the first game, didn't play at all because of an injury, and I think he'll probably get some time. Has been running first team all camp. The other guy is Kamoko Toure, and he looked great. He was on fire. In the last game that he played in, he basically single-handedly disrupted Patrick Mahomes' rhythm, and then compound fractured his ankle in like the third quarter of that game and knocked him out. It was like 4 weeks of terror of this guy that we finally thought maybe we've got a defensive end who can bring back some pass rush. The Colts have been void of pass rush for basically since Robert Mathis retired, and so seeing both of those guys do something, present some kind of a pass rush. We don't have great secondary. They're good, not great. And so you've got to have pressure on a quarterback. And so really the defensive ends are places I'm going to be watching. Kwity Paye, Kamoko Toure, even Ben Banigou, who is a guy who's basically a bubble guy. And he's looked good in camp, but he's never been able to make it translate to pads. So we really need to see him kind of stand out, or he's probably not on the roster. Those are the areas I'm going to be watching up front. The linebacker position, we feel pretty good about. You kind of know what you've got in the defensive backs, even if it's maybe not as good as you'd like it to be. But those defensive ends, that's a big question mark. And same thing for us on the offensive side. The tackle positions are, well, the left tackle position is really the big struggle. The Colts signed Eric Fisher. He's not going to be back necessarily to start the season. So who's going to be filling that in, and can they be better than? I mean, I jokingly said on Twitter last week, I thought the Colts would have been better sitting their left tackle and starting a third tight end just at that spot, because at least then you don't expect them to block anyone. It's just like, at least they could catch a pass if you need them to do something like this. It was bad. And without having a really experienced quarterback, it makes it even worse. So I'll be watching that spot, and hopefully somebody who can show something.
Well, that's good, because our competition for the right defensive end spot, who would line up against your left tackle, is one that we're anxiously looking to see who's going to win. It's between a couple young guys, one vet and a couple young guys with Stephen Weatherly, DJ Wanham, and then two rookies, Janarius Robinson and Patrick Jones, I think the second or third. So it'll be interesting to see how they can do against a guy who maybe isn't a top tier left tackle, and see if they can take advantage. Because if Danielle Hunter plays, which it sounds based on what Dave is saying here in the comments, it does sound like we're going to start at least all of our starters for a little bit today, according to Matt Collar, who's one of the kind of reporters here in town. So we'll see how Danielle Hunter goes up against your, big bad right tackle. He's solid, so it'll be interesting to see that matchup as well. So and has anyone heard, Matt, any news on Everson Griffin? Did he sign yet? I've been kind of out of the loop for a little bit.
Yeah, our guy Darren Wolfson from KSTP and Score North mentioned earlier this evening that the workout went well. He looked explosive, so maybe Everson. I doubt he'd suit up for this game, but maybe Everson Griffin will be back. I want to kind of put you on the spot here for a second, Chris. Sometimes in Twitter, whatever, you kind of get just caught in your own team's fan base, emotions, whatever. I'm very curious to hear what you have heard about the Vikings. Or what even your thoughts are. I don't know how much you know about them, but I'm curious what you hear about them.
So I honestly, not a whole lot, because not a team obviously that we play very often. I think that they suffer from some of the same sort that the Colts do, where you just don't get a whole lot of national media attention. Unless you have that, some superstar that really kind of draws that. And really, it almost has to be the quarterback position, because really the most I've heard about the Vikings, honestly, this offseason has been about Kirk Cousins, and it has had to do more with COVID stuff than it has to do with actual football. And so it doesn't really tell me a whole lot. I've joked before on, I think some of these teams that you play once every 4 years, you get stuck in this old impression of this team. So I just have the, first of all, Mike Zimmer's quotes are always the funniest quotes. I love hearing any of his press conference stuff, because it's like, what coach is willing to just be, he's kind of like a gruffer Bruce Arians, maybe, like just he's going to shoot from the hip, but it's kind of like if Clint Eastwood was a coach. I feel like that he's just, that's my impression of just this grizzled guy who's like tired of everybody's garbage, and he's just not putting up with it anymore. So I kind of dig that, but, I not a whole lot, honestly, as far as, I haven't kept up with a whole lot anyway. But yeah, I don't have any strong impressions other than that I expect them to be sort of a team that's going to try to do kind of what the Colts like to do. And I remember playing the game last year and feeling like that was a team that was kind of like us. Same sort of strengths, and yeah, but as far as this year, I'm out of the loop. I don't have a whole lot of knowledge to contribute or anything there.
Well, you're not missing too much. I mean, to your point, I think that the Kirk stuff is obviously valid. What you've heard, Zimmer stuff is valid. Um, we're a team that's very top heavy, and I think depth is our biggest concern heading into this season. I think when you look at our offense, it is probably a championship caliber offense, assuming the offensive line gets figured out. And then defensively, obviously, we have, a really good interior pass rush, and just honestly from right to left, except for that left defensive end position, a very good team or defensive line. Linebackers are good. Corners, fingers crossed, and then you got Harrison Smith, who is underrated as always, but pretty good. So yeah, I guess kind of the same, right? I wish we could have Quentin Nelson. So if
Well,
you
for,
want
for
Dakota
5 to 12
Dozier,
weeks, we may not either. So
I would take 5. I would take that still over what we've had to put out there at guard these past couple years.
yeah,
Before we touch on a former Viking, Xavier Rhodes, I selfishly have to ask. Ryan already brought this up a little bit earlier with his fantasy team. I have Michael Pittman, and I want to know what he looks like and what you expect out of him this year.
he looks like the Colts' #1 wide receiver.
That's what I like to hear.
He's looked very good. He became a dad over this offseason, and I don't know if you guys have kids. I know that does change you. It changes your perspective on the world, but he has come into camp like a man on a mission, and he was kind of like the sit back and watch and be mentored and ask lots of questions and learn. And it's something clicked with him in year 2, and he's like, all right, this is mine now. This team belongs to me, and I'm taking control. T.Y. Hilton is great. He's clearly, the best thing that the Colts could have is to put him in a wide receiver 2 or 3 role, because he's a huge pain to deal with. He's such a wily guy. He's so small, and he knows how to draw pass interference penalties really effectively. He's a great route runner, but he doesn't have that top end speed, and he can't go. I mean, he's like 5'9". He's not going up and going over anybody. So he really has taken over that role. And I think it's hard with the Colts. I don't recommend any Colts players for fantasy, just because Frank Reich likes to spread the ball around so much that it's just going to make you depressed, because you're going to have him starting, and then he's going to do, I think it's 60 yards and no touchdown, and then you're going to sit him and he's going to blow it up the next week. It's just they're just going to break your heart all season long. I'm afraid, but if there was a guy who was going to do really well, I would guess it would be Michael Pittman, because he has just all of the ability, and he's already built. Like, he went and worked with Carson Wentz, I think 3 different times in the offseason, just independently, and they were just throwing. So if anybody's going to break out and have just a really big second year, he had a weird injury like midway through the season where I don't even remember what he did some sort of weird thing to his calf, and had to have a major surgery. It was kind of a just freak thing that happened, and it knocked him out for like 3 games, and it really kind of killed his momentum. And then from there on, he really progressively got better to the end of the season. So there's part of me that wonders if we would be talking more about him anyway had he not had that injury. But yeah, he looks like he's going to be legit. I would say you should feel good about that, other than if Frank Reich just decides to make your life miserable and have him throw to 11 different receivers every game or whatever.
Should
That's
Jonathan
just fantasy.
Taylor owners be concerned at all with, Marlon Mack being back, Nyheim Hines being productive out of the backfield? What are your thoughts there?
I don't think so. I think Jonathan Taylor is too much of a beast to be ignored. I think that's the one exception. I think they're going to use Marlon Mack. I think they're going to use Nyheim Hines. Nyheim Hines has got to be the most infuriating fantasy player ever, because he'll have a game where he got like 200 yards. He runs back a punt like for a touchdown. He just has these just crazy games, and then he will get no snaps the next game or something. They very much cater their game plans. We have a deep backfield. There are really good running backs that I watched on Sunday. Guys who are basically 3rd, 4th, 5th running backs that are going to get cut and go and could probably start somewhere and do well. But Jonathan Taylor is just different, man. He's just something else. I'm excited that Marlon Mack looks as good as he does. He looked good in the preseason game. He's he's a weird guy because he has like fixed one thing about his game almost every offseason and just keeps getting these little things better. So it was a heartbreaker when he went down, but it was pretty cool that we were able to bring him back. I just still don't think that he's just not on the same level as far as gifts as Jonathan Taylor. So I think you should feel pretty good about having him on your roster because he's going to get the ball.
Nice.
I'm glad to see Jonathan Taylor's doing well. I kind of rooted for him a little bit in college, and people.
You
people
rooted
kinda
for
were
a
shitting on him.
Badger?
You know what? You got to respect how good he was. And
Well, I mean, yeah, you can respect greatness, but you don't have to root for him. It's not like I'm rooting for Aaron Rodgers. I respect him. I won't root for him.
That's fair. That's probably more about what it was. But I did feel bad when he finally did get to the NFL. And I felt like people were quick to kind of like, I don't know. I don't think people went as far to call him a bust, but I think he did start a little bit slow last year, and people were
I dismissed him quick.
Jonathan Taylor. And by the end of the season, I don't know. He looked to be a top 5 to me. So I hope he can continue that, and I'm glad we don't face you in the regular season. If after this week, we hopefully will only see you in the Super Bowl. So,
yeah, it's certainly helpful when you get to like have Quentin Nelson pulling and you get to run behind him. That makes your life a little bit easier. I was thinking about one of the penalties that I saw where the blocking, it's like the chop blocking or whatever on the downfield lineman. And I thought, man, if that's a penalty, nobody's going to stop the Colts. They're just going to run a wham play, and it's just going to be run behind Quentin Nelson, and it's either a penalty or he's going to kill anybody who gets in front of him. And then Jonathan Taylor just dances into the end zone. This seems like the only play you need in the book, right? This is like a Madden simulation where you just run one play. But yeah, I think he was a little bit lost early, and he definitely came on and started, his vision improved, and he was a different player over like the last 6 to 8 weeks of the season. I think he actually was running at a higher pace yards wise than Derrick Henry. I think he was over if you extrapolated those last 6 games over the season, he maybe, I don't know. It was kind of wild. So.
Hey, Chris, we have a guest comment here that came in. I know you touched base on him a little bit in terms of you're excited to watch him play a little bit, but Deshaun Vaughn, he's actually one of our Climb in the Pocket contributors as well, wants to know what's the word on Kwity Paye. He hears they're having a good camp. I know if I remember correctly, Deshaun was really high on Kwity Paye. I think he really wanted the Vikings to draft him actually because we obviously had a big need at that other defensive end spot with the uncertainty of Daniel Hunter at the time of the draft. So, what's the word on him? Are you excited? Tell me a little bit more.
Yeah. He was one of those players that as the people were coming off the board, Colts fans were kind of holding our breath because he was a guy who was ranked really high among a lot of us. He was most of our top defensive end. And so to have him make it to 21 was just great. I mean, we couldn't have asked for better than that. And so, yeah, he's looked good. He has, again, unfortunately, we're pessimistically looking at this through the scope of him dominating somebody like Will Holden. So just as a precursor, if your defensive ends are dominating Will Holden, you can't. That tells you nothing about them because Will Holden might be the worst offensive lineman in the NFL. I feel bad.
Hold on there.
We have
somebody over here.
Yeah, we have 2 offensive linemen that hold that title. Okay, so.
Oh man, well, Will Holden would like to compete. He'd like to be in the discussion. But man, he has been awful, and so I don't know. The word has been really that he's looked great, but he has not been playing against Anthony Costanzo. He has not been going up against Quentin Nelson and having to deal with help from Quentin Nelson. So I don't know what to think. I'm holding out judgment until he has faced some better talent. But I mean, he's going to be matched up one-on-one in regular season games because standing next to him is going to be DeForest Buckner. So I'm hoping that our defensive ends are going to benefit from the talent on the inside, and that there's just going to have to be some level of, you're going to put me on an island because you can't ignore DeForest Buckner or single. I mean, if you're going to single up DeForest Buckner, he's going to make you pay. And so I've been impressed with what we've seen so far, but it's kind of with that caveat that we don't really know how good the talent is he's been across from.
Good to know. Good to know. All right, so let's talk Xavier a minute. Obviously, he spent all of his career up until when he joined you guys with the Vikings. He kind of had a down year before he came over to your team, and then put up just another. What are you excited about? Do you have any concerns with him, just given the fact that he has had kind of that track record of being really good and then maybe falling off a little bit? Tell us a little bit more about your feelings with Xavier Rhodes.
Well, I don't know. I think you don't know with fall off of players what to expect, because they get to a certain age and it can happen almost instantaneously with corners. But what I do know is that he was actually quoted this week, and it was really encouraging because he has actually been working with Mike Strawn, who I mentioned earlier, the rookie wide receiver, and kind of giving him some tips on how to maximize his effectiveness. And I just thought, man, this is why you bring in these kinds of veteran guys, and why the Colts are careful about the kind of people they bring in, because that's exactly what you want from a teammate, is somebody who is pushing these talented young players and making them better. And so he was talking about specifically kind of just giving him some tips about how to use his size and get physical with corners, and kind of talking to him, what does that look like? And it's like, man, that's exactly what you want. I don't know that the Colts they've started to develop a ton of veteran leadership. They did not have that in the defensive backfield last year until he was on. And he really anchored a lot of that. We've got a very young team in some ways, and there are some leaders at every level, but you didn't have that necessarily in the cornerback room. Kenny Moore was probably that guy, and he's still really young. I mean, he's a really talented player, but he's a young guy. And so having that veteran presence and that guy who can kind of calm everybody down if you get punched in the mouth and all of a sudden you're ready to kind of get shaken up a little bit, and you need that veteran who knows and who's been there to just be like, man, just relax, take the next thing, one thing at a time. And as far as his play last season, he was excellent. I mean, he surprised everybody, because honestly, when you watched him, the thought was, this guy's too slow. He's too slow. He's not going to be able to do what we need him to do. But he was so instinctive and so crafty that he was all over the place. He made maybe more plays than any other defensive back that we had on the team, as far as just impact plays and constantly being where he needed to be. So I am optimistic, but I'm not going to take for granted that he's going to be that good again. The Colts don't lean with the scheme that we run heavily on cornerback talent individually. Much more scheme focused, and the front seven are kind of dictating things. So hopefully, if we've improved in the pass rush, he won't have to be as good as he was last year, and that'll mitigate some of that drop off that is likely to happen, both through track record and just through aging. But
I just want to let you know
absolutely.
that this is the second time in this pod that I've heard you bring up that receiver Strawn. And so while you were talking about in my dynasty league, so we'll see how that.
And literally, there's proof he literally just in the dynasty league, so that's funny. Yeah, so I'm happy for you guys that you got Rhodes. I was always a big fan of his. I know that he kind of, again, started to fall off a little bit at the end of his Vikings tenure, and some fans soured on him. He gave us a lot of really good years. Again, like you had said, really great leadership. I loved the days when he was locking down the then elite Odell Beckham Jr., the then elite Julio Jones, the then elite, AJ Green, all these guys, he would lock these guys down for, under 50 yards, under 5 catches, whatever it is, when they're used to getting 8-9 catches for 100 yards. Mike Evans was another one, and he let them know it too. He talked his shit with them, and he made it known that, yeah, he's got this locked down. And we can't, I don't know if you guys have this over in Indianapolis, but we had the Rhodes Close kind of moniker for him. I even have a shirt with Rhodes Closed on it. Actually, nice. I probably got rid of it. It was just fun. I'm happy that he kind of reinvigorated his career over there with you guys, and like you said, providing that leadership for your young secondary. Julian, he was really high on in the draft process. I'm glad to see that my couch scouting or whatever you want to call it, turned out to be right on him. I was a big fan of Julian Blackmon and Kenny Moore. I've always enjoyed watching him play from afar. Again, I don't watch every rep or anything like that, but you see him on SportsCenter highlights, or you just hear on Twitter that he's doing well. So you guys are doing some good things on that defense.
Yeah.
Is my internet back? Is it working?
You're good.
All right. Well, let's do two things here as we tie up the show. First off, I want your season predictions, Chris and Ryan, and your game predictions. But before we do that, I'm so bad about doing this in my pods. I want to make sure I get to it. Chris, tell everybody that's watching, that's going to be listening, again, about what you do, who you work with, anything you're working on for the upcoming season. Pretty much give yourself a little promo here on the show and let the fans know who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. So I write over at Stampede Blue, and we cover all things Colts. And I'm actually most prominently dealing with podcasts. That's my primary role. But I also do a few stories here and there, a little bit more during the season than off. But primarily my role is the audio side of things. And so we have a couple different podcasts on our podcast feed there. The one that I'm the host of is Stampede Radio. So it's kind of similar vibe, just kind of guys sitting around talking the ideas, just that, what would it be like if we're having a conversation about football and somebody just recorded it. And so, pretty laid back thing there. And then I do a daily news podcast that, is really just exactly what it sounds like. If you got a short commute and you just want to get up to date on the Colts and you don't want to read, I will read who is injured. I will read what roster moves to you and get that information to you so that you can be up to date on what's going on. And then as we get into the season, I do several stories and some film breakdowns as needed and all that fun stuff to kind of fill out the content over on Stampede Blue. Lots of good guys working over there to provide content. And then we've got a couple other good podcasts that go up there as well. So, quite a bit of that, and a lot of it's sound editing and all that good stuff. But anything to do with the Colts and an opportunity to talk about football is always something I'm pretty excited about.
Very good. Prediction time. What do you think your Colts are going to be come season end? And what are your thoughts on that?
This is a tough one because this asks. I've been avoiding these season predictions for so long because I'm such a waffler about what I think Carson Wentz is going to be. So I really had to kind of gut check, and I am almost exclusively a hopeless optimist. And I was the guy who filled out my team to win the NCAA tournament every year, even when that made no sense, and considered writing them in when they didn't even make it. So, I have that stupidity about me once I start getting really locked in. It's like, okay, intellectually, this is what I think. And so from, like I think I alluded to earlier, I think the floor for this team is just high enough that we're not in range of getting a quarterback to actually fix the problem. And the ceiling is a Super Bowl team. I don't think that Carson Wentz is the 2017 version of himself, but I also don't think he's the 2021 version of himself. I'd say that he is somewhere in the middle. And so I think this team is a 12-5 team. We have a pretty weak division. I mean, the Texans are pretty much 2 wins for the Colts because that organization is a mess. You got Jacksonville, who's still trying to get things figured out, and who knows what Trevor Lawrence is going to be. And is he a player who can just carry a whole team, or is that dysfunction going to be going on? I'm lower on the Texans or on the Titans than a lot of people. So I feel like in division, the Colts have a chance to get a lot of wins. And then, we're not necessarily facing a super tough schedule. I just feel like there's a pretty good chance that the Colts get a lot of wins just by nature of good defense, a really talented running game, and a quarterback not screwing anything up too much. So Carson doesn't have to be spectacular. He just has to not be a disaster. And I think this team can win at least 10 games. I'm going to say he has some above average performances that he plays like a good, not great quarterback. And I think that's a 12-5 record. And I still think I'm not optimistic about the offseason necessarily, or the postseason as much. I think they probably get knocked out in the championship round, which obviously would be nice, but still disappointing. So if we're flying high on optimism, that's I'll just go ahead and go all in there that I think they're gonna make it at least a couple of playoff games.
Well, there you go. I love the optimism here at Climb in the Pocket. We're not necessarily known for just pure optimism. We like to call ourselves more realists, right? We're not going to, blow smoke up anywhere, but we're also, we know, we feel we know football. We feel we know a quality team. I think we think the Vikings are a quality team. There's obviously some deficiencies at that offensive line, some questions still in the secondary. There's definitely some questions. And then, of course, just a lot of us are on that train with, Kirk Cousins not being vaccinated, what that potentially could mean for his season outlook if he were to somehow come in contact with somebody with COVID or get COVID himself. And then just, again, the lack of a quality backup behind him, at least as of right now. Of course, Kellen Mond could get better, or he could be the answer long-term for us. So we have Kirk on dock here for the next 2 seasons, but succession plan potentially there. Freddie, I'm sorry, buddy. I'm not going to say we're going to be 17-0. I don't think that's realistic. Like you, Chris, I don't like to really throw predictions out there too often. At one point I think I've been quoted as saying 8-9. One point saying 9-8. I think kind of our range is going to be right in there, anywhere from 7-10 to 11-6, right? I mean, I can see it go either way. Some of those close games, we play a lot of good teams. We play, the NFC or AFC North. They have 3 quality teams, maybe 4. I think we'll beat the Bengals, but the other 3 are quality teams. We play the third best NFC team on each division. So again, some of those are still pretty solid teams. And then our own division, we have Aaron Rodgers twice. We have the Bears, who always somehow give us trouble. And then Lions apparently are getting better. I'm not too worried about them, but it's a tough. It is going to be a tough schedule. I think we do play some really high quality teams, and I say you win half of those, and you're a playoff team in terms of the high quality teams, and then of course just take care of business everywhere else. So we play the NFC West. That's probably the strongest division in the NFC, with the Seahawks, the Niners, the Cardinals, who are on the come up, and the Rams, who are supposed to be pretty good. So again, pretty tough schedule. So I'm going to say 9-8, and I don't think that's good enough to make the playoffs, but we'll see. But I hope I'm wrong. I hope I should be more like Chris and say 12-5, and we're losing in the championship round. That's the optimistic side, but trying to be realistic. Tough schedule. Again, no, I'm going to say 10-7. I'll say 10-7.
I just have to say these new records are just ugly numbers. I'm not a fan. Right. I don't mind the extra game, but it really makes the numbers ugly. I wish that they're just. I mean, 12-5, 11, and it's just awful. I don't. It's so awkward rolling off the tongue.
Dave, I know Matt's connection's kind of coming in and out. Dave, do you have a prediction for the Vikings here? You're a little more optimistic on our side.
Well, I was about to say, I was going to tell Chris, we got a bunch of pessimists in the group. They call them realists.
You need everybody to pull them back to the pack. I've got one on my podcast too. He helps me out, keeps me from going way too out of control.
I'm a little bit more optimistic because I see the potential that this could be a very good team. However, Ryan is 100% correct. We have a killer season, especially after the first 6 games. We go into an absolute gauntlet of rough. A lot of the NFC West, a lot of times that we don't like. The Vikings like to play at noon on Sunday. It's a lot of travel to the West Coast, different things that aren't good for the Vikings. But if they put this all together, our defense can be top 10 and our offense can be top 10. And hopefully that is the case and we make it to the Golden Land. At least you guys won a Super Bowl. We're 0-60. So I'm hoping for at least one before I die. And as you can see, I got some gray. So, but I want to thank you personally for coming on. It's great to have you, especially being a sister site, being Stampede Blue, part of SB Nation, same as Daily Norseman, who is our partner. And we look forward to having you on in the future, hopefully in the big game.
That'd be all right. Although I feel like to be honest with you, I have friends who are Bears fans, and I did not get to properly enjoy that victory because I felt their agony. And I think after this conversation, it would be a little bit hard for me to fully enjoy it if that were the case. I would struggle. It'd be this conflict. I would love to go up against somebody that you just really the unlikable teams. You want to go up against an unlikable team that it's just like they probably deserve to have their hearts broken anyway. But
oh yes, and we've got our interdivision one, which is obviously the Packers. And we can't wait till Aaron Rodgers moves on. But we'll deal with him this season. We almost beat him twice last year. We'll beat him hopefully twice this season. And we love when Packers fans get all sorts of upset.
Yep.
Very good. Well, fans, thanks for joining in. Make sure you tune in tomorrow. We got Vikings Hot Takes with Flip. And I think Eric around tomorrow. So Flip and Eric are going to give you their hot takes for this weekend Colts game, as well as maybe hash over some of the stuff that happened last week against the Broncos. So make sure you tune in tomorrow, 8:00. And Dave, why don't you take us home?
Yes, and I'll explain to Chris. Viking Hot Takes is our fastest moving show. The guys are put on a 20-minute timer, 3 questions each. It is outstanding. You should check it out for a possible ripoff. Do an indie version, and people love it.
I dig that idea.
People love it. With that, I want to say thank you. We hope Indy the best of luck this season, except for Saturday, of course. And want to tell everybody, SKOL Vikings! Thank you for watching or listening. As always, if you like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications. And if you're listening to the podcast, please rate us on your favorite aggregator. SKOL, everybody.